All right. Thank you for coming and welcome to the first in our Caregiver series called Understanding Behavior, Behavior Functions, and How to Respond. My name is Rachel White. I am a board certified behavior analyst at the University of Alaska Anchorage Center for Human Development, and I'm part of the Behavior Analysis Training and Support team. So, we wanted to start with what is behavior? Behavior sometimes gets the connotation that we're talking only about bad behaviors or things that we want to get rid of. But behavior is everything that we do. It's either learned or there are some behaviors that we are born with, those instincts. Behavior is influenced by the environment, events in our lives, people in our lives, our surroundings, our learning history. We can change the behavior in others and in ourselves every day. The way we interact with others, the things that we do affect how other people behave and maybe how they respond to us, and vice versa. The way that they interact with us and the way our environment is set up is going to affect our behavior. Sometimes changing behavior is purposeful and we intend to change behaviors, like when we're trying to teach a new skill to our learners. Sometimes we're not aware of the fact that we are teaching someone something or that somebody is learning or their behavior is changing based upon their interactions with us. From a behavior perspective, behavior analytic perspective, all behavior serves a purpose for that person. Generally, we're talking about it's to meet the individual's needs, to help them get what they want, or to avoid things that they don't want. And that explains our behavior too. We do things that work for us. They get our needs met, they get things we want, they get us out of things we don't want. With this in mind, we then can think of behavior as a form of communication. Now, not necessarily the most effective form of communication. Sometimes we want to increase different communication skills, but a behavior is going to be, again, sort of working for that person to help get their needs met. So if we understand the behavior, we can understand what it is that that person wants. Behavior is connected to the environment. So our behaviors do not occur in isolation. And we will also have a chance to interact with our environment, and our environment interacts with us, and the behaviors that we use change based upon our environments and the histories. One behavior can have multiple purposes. So a learner may raise their hand in class to get attention. They may raise their hand to go to the bathroom so that they can get out of some work. They also might raise their hand to catch a ball. That's a very silly kind of example, but one behavior can have multiple purposes for the individual. In different situations, they might use the same behavior for different things. Overly applied behaviors, problem behaviors, challenging behaviors, disruptive behaviors, these are often what people think of when they say, oh, this kid has behaviors, right? Or my learner has some behaviors we want to work on. But really, we need to ask, who are these behaviors a problem for? Who finds these behaviors challenging and who finds these behaviors disruptive? Because again, the behaviors that the learner is using are designed to get that learner's needs met. They may not be the most efficient, and that's kind of where we use this overly applied terminology as opposed to problem or challenging or disruptive. Overly applied, these behaviors may be very appropriate under certain conditions, but they are overly applied to every situation or to more situations than would be most efficient for the learner. However, all behavior meets a need for that learner, so we need to determine what is the unmet need that this learner is using this behavior to try to get their need met. Once we know why they're using this behavior, then we can teach a more efficient way to get those needs met. And then the behavior is, they no longer are reliant upon that overly applied behavior. However, again, remember that an overly applied behavior, again, something we might call problem or challenging, is still a demand or request for their unmet needs. So we still need to think about what are the needs that the learner has. So when do behaviors become considered overly applied? Generally, we're talking about behaviors that are occurring too frequently and often enough that it might be disruptive to the learning process for that learner or for others. This could be yelling, it could be out of position or out of seat, a low attention span, maybe shouting out in class or refusing to do work. It could be behaviors that pose a risk to themselves or others, so aggression, property destruction, self-injurious behaviors, very severe tantrums, or elopement, also sometimes called bolting, but this is running away, right? Another reason that a behavior might be considered overly applied is that it interferes with the ability to engage in everyday activities, and therefore it affects that individual's quality of life. And so those reasons might be things that we would want to look at that overly applied behavior and determine the function and help our learner be more efficient in getting their needs met. So how do we understand behavior? First of all, let's talk about ABC data. So you may have heard of ABC data before. The A stands for antecedent, and that is what's happening right before the behavior occurs. B stands for behavior, and that's specifically what behavior occurred. And then C stands for consequence, and that is what happens right after the behavior. Now, in this case, the antecedent and the consequence are, well, all three of these, antecedent, behavior, and consequence. We're really just trying to describe what's occurring immediately before, immediately after, and specifically what we saw or heard as far as the behavior went. We're not trying to interpret it during ABC data. We're not trying to make guesses as to what somebody might be thinking or feeling. We do want to absolutely report if they say, oh, I'm really mad, or I feel very hungry. We can write down what they're saying and doing. But we don't want to make guesses, because if we make a guess at this point in the process, then we will have a hard time interpreting the ABC data later, because we use ABC data to look for patterns. So antecedents are what happens right before the behavior. This could be immediate, like the trigger, so mom said no, or it could be things that might have happened a few hours before, things like they didn't get a good night's sleep, or breakfast was really rushed this morning, and so they didn't get as much time to be leisurely with their morning routine. It might also be talking about just immediate seconds and the environment that's going on. Are there people watching? If I'm asked to stand up in front of the classroom, and now everybody's looking at me, that could be an antecedent to a particular behavior. Are people reacting? What is everyone else doing at this time? Was there supposed to be some sort of instruction in place? Were they supposed to be doing something like cleaning their room or finishing their homework? Were they given a direction or given some instructions? Those are all the things that we might consider with antecedents. You might also be familiar with a term called setting events. These are antecedents, but they are often a little bit further removed, often things that might build up over time. This could be things like if they're sick. I mentioned the sleep. If they haven't been sleeping well, maybe there's some medication changes, and medications can affect how someone might respond in certain situations. Maybe there's some personal things going on, like they've had a fight with their friend, or if they are in a dating relationship, maybe that's not going very well for them right now. There might be changes in a household. If the family is military and one of the caregivers has now been sent elsewhere for a while, that may create a change in routine, and that learner may be missing the person who's not there. They could be hungry. That's always something we want to consider. It could be things like being hungry. There could be other life events or stressors. So these are still antecedents. They may not be immediately apparent. They may not be like an immediate trigger, but they will affect how a specific antecedent may affect the behavior. So, for example, if I have a headache, I'm starting to get sick and I've got a headache, and then the teacher gives me more homework, I might be less inclined to do that homework. I might be more vocal in my complaints because I already don't feel good, as opposed to if I'm feeling fine, that might not be a big deal. So, something to think about there. Let's see. All right, so the immediate triggers are the trigger or what sets off that particular behavior. These are the ones that are very close in time to the behavior. Setting events are further removed, but our immediate antecedents are the ones that are what sort of like the analogy or metaphor, the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It's the very last thing. What was the last thing they could handle, or what was the last thing that came up? Understanding the setting events and the triggers can help us support individuals. We'll go through how do we support them once we know these patterns, but this might be things like making sure that our learners pack a snack before we go to do something that's maybe less preferred, like shopping. I'm going to carry snacks. I do this with my own kid all the time. I make sure we have a snack in the car just in case, because things won't go well after a certain point if my child is hungry. All right, so in our ABC data, the middle section is behavior. B, behavior. What does the behavior look like? And is it clearly defined? So this is where we do want to be specific as to what we are seeing and hearing, what the learner is specifically doing. And we don't want to abbreviate that too much. So for example, the example here, aggression. I could say aggression, but aggression for some learners is going to look different than other learners. And what if we're concerned with the intensity of the aggression? Instead, I might need to spell it out and say the behavior included kicking the desk and slamming his fist on the table, and then throwing his book at the teacher, right? That those were the things that occurred at that time. We might also say, you might say, oh, they threw a tantrum. It's like, okay, well, tantrums look different for different individuals. So what does this tantrum look like? They flopped on the floor, they cried, they had tears coming from their eyes, they were yelling, those sorts of things. You do want to be specific. So if they did include any language, right? Like, oh, I hate you, or you make me so mad, or whatever it is, you would describe that too. Again, we want to look at it specifically because that way we can go back and we can look for patterns as far as when are these behaviors maybe more intense, under what conditions, when is it not as intense. And then also so that we can tell if things are moving in the right direction for our learner, because the behaviors are becoming less intense, or the words that they're using when they're, in the middle of that have changed. And I'm giving examples of, these overly applied behaviors because that's generally why we're taking ABC data, but ABC data would still apply to everything, even those positive behaviors or appropriate and efficient behaviors that we might use. So the phone rings is my antecedent. The behavior is I look at the phone number and see if I want to answer it. And if it's my friend, then I answer the phone, and then the consequences, I get to talk to my friend, right? So ABC data is not specific to overly applied behaviors, but we do tend to talk about them that way because we're generally most concerned with the function of behaviors that are being overly applied so that we can help our learner be more efficient in getting their needs met in the future. Something to consider when you're talking about the behaviors are precursors. So precursor behaviors are often small behaviors that tend to happen before a bigger one. So, for example, maybe I can tell that my learner is getting frustrated, and frustrated is, our interpretation of that. But I can tell that we're struggling because I see my learner clench their fists. I see them bite their teeth and they're gritting their teeth. And I'm like, oh, those are precursor behaviors. My learner is probably going to hit somebody if they have a chance. So, I can see the signs that a behavior is coming, right? Other things you can start to tell, maybe I'll use my own kid as an example, right? I can start to tell that like we're hitting our limit because they're sighing more and they're putting their hands on their head, and and they're just not engaging in the same way. They're not smiling, they're not talking, they're quieter. Those would be precursor behaviors. Identifying precursor behaviors can be helpful because then you can avoid the big overly adapted behaviors because you see that they're coming and you can change the environment, change the antecedents, change the consequences, start doing an intervention to help the learner before the large overly adapted behavior. So when my child was younger, it might be things like, oh, I can see you're starting to get a little frustrated. Are you hungry? Have you had a snack? Let's have a quick snack. Or, I can see that this game is getting frustrating for you. Why don't we take a little break? Right? So you can do things like that before the big table flip, knock the game off the table, because you're seeing those precursors. Precursors are going to vary depending upon the individual, possibly depending upon the situation. It could be changes in their voice, their posture, maybe other signals that you have picked up on by spending time with your learner. But it would be something that reliably occurs prior to that larger overly adapted behavior, that signals that things are escalating and they are headed in that direction. And again, by identifying any precursors, then we can just help sooner. Not every learner and not every overly adapted behavior may have precursors. Some of our learners kind of go from 0 to 60, and we just don't see anything before that. And that's okay. I mean, obviously that's something that we'll have to work with. So if you don't see any precursor behaviors, it's not that you're necessarily missing them. They're not always present. But if they are, if you can look and you can say, oh, I see that things are headed this direction, then that does give you another clue and an earlier point at which you can start supporting your learner differently so that they can be successful. All right, so in our ABC data, the C stands for consequence. Now, in this case, the consequence is what happens right after the behavior of interest. We're not talking about consequences like a disciplinary action or anything like that. It's not, oh, you didn't do your homework, so the consequence is you don't have electronics. We're just talking about what was the immediate result of the behavior. How did that behavior change the learner's environment? Because that is often a huge clue as to why the learner is using that behavior. And we'll talk about some in a minute. But some consequences have an immediate effect on the behavior of interest, and others have little to no impact. So if my learner didn't do their homework, since I started with that one, if my learner didn't do their homework and I might take away their electronic time for the night, that could be a consequence that affects the behavior, but it also could be that maybe they just really hate math that much and they're willing to lose their electronics to not have to do math. So maybe that behavior, that consequence doesn't actually affect the behavior. Maybe the consequence that affects it is the fact that they got out of having to do math homework at home, and they just have more time to play outside with their friends, even if they can't use the electronics, right? So we do have to consider things from the learner's perspective, just because as parents or caregivers or providers, we might attempt to deliver a consequence with the hope of changing their behavior. Our consequence may not have the same effect that we thought it would, because it's actually viewed differently from the learner's perspective. And an example of that would be reprimands. So sometimes an individual might engage in a behavior that might often get a reprimand in that setting, right? Maybe in the school setting. A reprimand, generally from the person delivering the reprimand, is supposed to, correct the behavior and encourage the learner not to do it again. However, for a learner who really enjoys the attention of that person, and maybe that person doesn't give attention for the positive things that the learner does, if that attention is super valuable, they might do things that they know they're going to get reprimanded for, because bad attention is still good to them. Attention is attention, right? It's kind of that, like, what's that saying? No press is bad press, or something like that, right? Like, as long as somebody's talking about you, it's good, right? We see that maybe in the media. As long as people are talking about it, then it's the attention that they want, right? So you do have to view it from the learner's perspective. Do they, are they getting their needs met by this consequence, even if maybe the intent of the consequence was not the same that the learner's getting out of it? So when we take our ABC data, basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to record the antecedent behavior consequence across several opportunities for us to then be able to see a pattern. So we want to look for patterns. What are the usual antecedents before this behavior that we're interested in? What are the usual consequences? And from that, trying to determine, okay, what does it look like is happening? What is this learner trying to get or get out of? What need are they meeting by engaging in this pattern? So, um, it could be things like every time it's time for homework, that's our antecedent, the learner engages in this behavior, and the consequence is that homework gets delayed, that mom sits with the learner and delivers a lot of attention and helps the learner with the homework, right? So it could be meeting the need of the work is really hard and the learner needs more help. Um, the learner gets to delay having to start the homework, and the learner gets to have, mom's one-on-one attention for a little while. So there might be several things. It could be one piece of those things. It could be the combination of those things. But we look for those patterns, okay? The learner's need or that purpose of the behavior, that's the function of behavior. And when we talk about determining the function of a behavior, that's really all we're talking about. Why is the learner engaging in this behavior? What need does it meet for them? And then what we can do is we can use that information now that we know what the learner is trying, what need the learner is trying to get met. We can help the learner be more efficient in getting that need met, usually by teaching them a way that's more socially accepted and likely to result in getting their need met quicker. Okay, and we'll talk about that. So there are some common functions. This is not everything, and I'm going to try not to get into too much of the behavioral terminology, but these are common functions that you might encounter. So one way to remember it is everybody eats, EATS. E stands for escape. The individual is trying to get away from someone or something. They're trying to escape what's going on. A stands for attention. They're trying to get some kind of interaction from a particular individual or group of individuals, like their peers. T is tangible. This is they're trying to get access to an item or activity, a specific thing that they can't access on their own. And then S stands for sensory. And there's really two large sections that, or two large types that get lumped in under sensory, but it's important to remember both. One, and this is the one I think most people more commonly think of, is to get a preferred sensation. Sensory stimulation, they like it, it feels good, it looks cool, whatever it is, right? That is one sensory component. However, there's also a sensory could include getting away from a painful stimulus. So me taking an aspirin when I have a headache is sensory because it gets rid of my headache. I guess it kind of could be escape, but often if it doesn't involve another person, then we're thinking of it as sensory, right? So these are the most common functions. There could be variations and there can be combinations, right? Your learner might, in our homework example, they might enjoy the escape of having to do the hard work, and they might enjoy the attention because someone is there next to them. And that's okay. It's okay for functions to be very complex, to have multiple components. This is a nice way to start to think of it, but it's not the only way. So if these don't exactly match what you're experiencing with your learner, that's okay. But these are a good jumping off point and are very common. The escape, attentional, and tangible, those are considered social functions. They generally involve somebody else, either, placing the demand or aversive thing on them for the escape, giving the attention or giving the item, because if the learner could get it themselves, then, they wouldn't need to engage in the behavior, right? All right, so why do we care about the function? If we know why the learner's engaging in the behavior, then we can help them to get their needs met in a more efficient and effective way for that environment. So again, we talked about these being overly applied behaviors. They may have a time and a place where that behavior works very well. There may be other situations that that behavior now has been applied to that it works, but there's a better way, a more efficient and effective way in that environment. So a lot of times, and we'll come to this, but a lot of times when we're talking about how do we teach a learner a different skill to be more efficient, a lot of it is communication, right? Can you tell me what you want? Because if you're just crying, I have to guess, and maybe I'm not a very good guesser, right? Think about a baby. When babies are born, they can cry and they cry for everything because they don't have any other way to get their needs met. Over time, the caregivers probably will start to differentiate some cries. Oh, when they cry like this, that means this, they want this, or they need this. This means they're hungry. This means they need a diaper change. This means they're tired. And neurotypical or typically developing children might even develop some very early communication skills, like some modified signs that they can use, like 6 to 9 months before they have any vocal language. So we can start to then get better at guessing, but then having a reliable communication system can make meeting the needs of an individual a lot easier because we know exactly what it is that they want. So, how do we change these overly applied behaviors? We're going to go through 3 pieces. Every behavior meets a need for a learner. So we have to remember that this behavior serves a function for our learner. So we can't just get them not to do it without meeting their need. They still need to get their needs met. And this is where strategies like punishment are not effective for overly applied behaviors if they aren't taking into consideration the function of the behavior. Because if I just punish you in whatever fashion for doing a behavior, but I don't give you any other way to get that need met, maybe I don't even try to figure out what need you have that's unmet, I'm basically just, squashing it down. I might be able to reduce that behavior, but you still have that unmet need. So you're just going to find another way to get that need met. And it may or may not be a more efficient or effective. I worked with an individual at a school, and I don't know how the behavior got to the point where it was, but in order for the learner to get out of having to do group reading task, the learner walked into the classroom and threw a chair across the classroom. This was an elementary school. And that's a pretty extreme behavior with like no precursors. And it was basically that, as we found out, sort of through trial and error, the school had been like reprimanding or punishing or taking away recess or trying this and trying that, but they had never really figured out why the learner was engaging in these behaviors. And so they never gave the learner a strategy for how to get their needs met. It turns out the learner really struggled with reading and was embarrassed to try and read aloud with the peers in his classroom. So as soon as, we started working on increasing reading ability and giving him the words to say, can I go read with, the resource teacher or whatever, fine, no behaviors, right? Because now he had been given a way to get his needs met, which was, not to be embarrassed. And we were also still working on the skill building so that hopefully he would feel more confident in the future, but gave him an out for now. So the 3 steps got a little off topic there. The 3 steps are: 1, we're going to arrange the environment to meet the learner's needs. So remember our antecedent behavior consequence data? Our first piece is going to be about the antecedents. Once we know what needs the learner has, that they're using this overly applied behavior to try to get their needs met, we can attempt to set up the environment to meet those needs. That's the ideal, right? And I'm going to give you rough percentages just so you can kind of visualize it, but like half of your intervention should be trying to meet the learner's needs before they need to engage in these overly applied behaviors. All right. Then the second piece for the behavior is teach a replacement behavior. So instead of with punishment where we're not instructing them on what to do instead, we need to teach them specifically, here's a better way to get that need met. Here's a way that is more efficient, it's easier for you, it's more effective. People in the environment are going to recognize what you need faster because, you're able to tell them, or you're able to engage in a behavior that's likely to get that reinforcer a lot easier in that setting. That should be, again, like almost half, like maybe 45% of your intervention. If you do those 2 steps, like here we go, like 95% of the intervention, well, the overly applied behavior won't actually occur. So we don't have to worry about a consequence if we do enough of the prep work. However, sometimes things still happen. Sometimes we can't arrange the environment perfectly. Sometimes it's taking a long time for the replacement behaviors to be learned. So we will talk about what to do if the behaviors occur. But I present this as maybe in contrast to historically and in general the way we're taught to manage behaviors. Often we are taught that you need to do something, have some sort of discipline, have some sort of punisher, have some sort of consequence as a result of the behavior to teach the learner not to do that behavior. And what I'm saying is we need to flip that around. The behavior serves a function. We need to identify the function, and then we need to meet the learner's needs, teach them how to get their needs met in the environment where they're using this behavior. And if we do both of those things, then they don't need to use the behavior. So we don't have to follow it up with a consequence, because the consequence in and of itself, and in this case, the disciplinary action, I'll say that, the disciplinary action in and of itself isn't teaching them. So that's sort of the flip that we're trying to make. We're not focusing on what do I do if my learner hits. I'm going to ask you, why is your learner hitting? And then we can say, oh, he's hitting because he wants a turn with the toys. All right, well, let's see if we can get, a perfect environment where he already has the toys that he likes, or there's duplicates of all the toys, or there's a sharing schedule where everybody gets the same amount of time with the toys. And then a replacement behavior. Let's teach him to ask, my turn, for the toys. Let's teach him to share. Let's reinforce him for asking. If he's got toys that he likes to play with and he knows how to ask for his turn, it's very unlikely that he will need to hit to have to get a turn or get access to the toy. Therefore, we don't have to have a consequence, a disciplinary consequence for hitting. So we're going to walk through those pieces now. So number 1, arrange the environment. Meet the learner's need. If their needs are met, they don't have to use the overly applied behavior to get their needs met because their needs are met, right? So we do want to consider, what are the internal and external factors that might be contributing to meeting the needs. It's going to look different for every function. If the individual is engaging in behaviors to get access to items, then our arranging the environment might look like having extras, right? Instead of there only being one red race car in the car bin and everybody wants the red one, let's get 4 or 5 red race cars, right? If the learner is engaging in the behavior for attention, then let's give them lots of attention. Let's go by every 30 seconds or a minute and check in with them. Let's engage with them. Let's smile. Let's give them a thumbs up. Let's interact with them and give them that frequent attention. If the learner is engaging in the behavior to get out of something, let's build in more frequent breaks so that they get breaks often enough that they don't feel overwhelmed with whatever the activity is. Now, you may be thinking, I can't do that forever, and that's okay. Nobody's asking you to do it forever, but we're saying in a perfect environment, what could we do to arrange the environment so that all their needs are met? Because that's going to get rid of your behavior, right? If I am sneaking Skittles, right? I'm sneaking candy out of the candy jar. If you don't want me to sneak candy out of the candy jar, you just leave candy around on the tables and I can have it whenever I want. I'm no longer having to sneak it. If my whole function was to just to get the candy, now it's freely available. So I don't need to sneak it before, right? Problem solved, right? Well, okay, I can't realistically just eat candy all the time. So that's where we would start teaching, okay, what are the other behaviors, right? But again, just think like if I could arrange the environment to be this perfect condition where they would never have to engage in this behavior, what would that look like? And then see how much of it can you do. There are lots of things that affect our behavior in the environment. Some things that we might think of when we're talking about arranging these environments to be, you know, what would be a perfect situation so that my learner's needs are all met. Maybe the light is affecting our learners. About this time where we start losing so much daylight, it can be hard on a lot of us, not just our learners. Make it a lot more sluggish to get up in the mornings. Time of day. Some people do better in the mornings. Some people do better in the middle of the day. Some people do better later in the day. You know, think about what's the best environment or timing for your learner. Maybe there can be some changes in the routines, right? Maybe if we switch the order of the routines around, that would make it easier for our learner. Maybe we need to consider the people or how crowded a situation is. What would be the appropriate or best environment for our learner? What about sounds and noises? Can we think of what those might look like? If we're talking about school or even at home, like the physical arrangements, you know, are the things that they need where they can easily access them? In school, you know, are the people that are near them distracting to them, or is it too far for them to see from the board? Think about what the physical environment looks like for your learner and how you might be able to change that to reduce their need, to try and meet their needs so they don't need to use that overly applied behavior. Physical environment, yeah. Furniture, classroom, maybe lighting. Is the light one of those fluorescent ones that's really bright and kind of buzzes? Think about the timing of certain activities. Think about how long you're expecting somebody to do the activity. Maybe there are different people that they could do the activity with. Can you have everything prepared ahead of time? Can you change the way it looks when you present that task? So instead of saying, you know, it's time to clean your room, you can maybe say, okay, you know, in 5 minutes, we're gonna need to straighten up a little bit, because maybe straightening up isn't as scary a sounding word as clean your room, right? Maybe you just change kind of the way that it's presented. Some other things that are going to help just in general with reducing overly adaptive behavior that fall under that like antecedent strategies and arranging the environment is going to be building rapport. Now, if you are the primary caregiver for an individual, you probably already have a level of rapport just from the fact that you have been meeting their needs for a long time. However, it's not automatic, and sometimes even with our own kids, our rapport can suffer because we all get into bad habits, and maybe we're only focusing on when things aren't going well instead of focusing on when things are going well. Maybe we're busy and we don't get a lot of time to just do fun things with our learners. So these are some strategies to build that rapport and to make sure that we can keep or grow a more positive relationship with the individual whose needs we are trying to meet. Because if we have good rapport, it's going to be easier for us to teach them a new strategy. So these would be things that you can do at home. The Pride rules come from Sheila Iberg and parent-child interaction therapy. So you may or may not have seen these before, but they had caregivers spend 5 minutes a day, just 5 minutes a day, just practicing these, and saw that really helped. So it doesn't have to be like a huge commitment either. So P stands for praising the appropriate behavior. What are they doing right? What are they doing well? What are you proud of them for? R is reflecting appropriate talk. So this is going to be like repeating back or acknowledging what they're communicating to you. I is imitating their appropriate play. So you're talking about their interests. You're playing the games or the toys that they're interested with. Again, it can just be for 5 minutes. So don't think you have to do, a 45-minute tea party or anything like that. D is describing the appropriate behavior, especially for learners who are still developing their communication skills. This just models good language for them. You just describe what you're doing. Oh, you're pushing the car. Oh, look at that. The Legos are fighting in the tower or whatever, right? For learners that do have a lot more language skills, it's less about, sort of giving the play-by-play of what they're doing and more just making statements instead of questions. So I see you're watching such and such TV show. I've never seen it before. So you're not asking them to tell you about it. You're just commenting on what they're doing. E is enthusiasm, positive emotions, energy, excited. Again, even if it's just for 5 minutes, fake it, pretend like you're having fun with your learner. That shows them that you're interested in them and what they find interesting. And so doing these things can really help, again, even if it's a short period of time, can really help to rebuild or to maintain a positive relationship that's going to make it easier for you to teach things to replace those overly applied behaviors. Praise to reprimands is another thing to consider. And again, this kind of goes along with the building a positive environment, but it's also very helpful for learners whose behavior is seeking attention. They're still going to want that attention, but if we can give more attention for all the things they're doing well and the things they're doing right and the things that are going smoothly, then they can start adjusting their behavior to doing more of those things because it's easier to get attention for that. So the idea is that you would give 5 praise to every 1 reprimand. Now it's not a strict like praise, reprimand, but in general, sort of an average. The goal is that you become viewed as a more fun person because you're doing the fun things, you're telling them the fun things, you're encouraging them and supporting them. You're giving lots of attention for the good things. And only when it's very necessary do you provide any sort of critique or criticism or reprimand. And if you can avoid it altogether because you're doing so much positive stuff and you just wait and then they do something positive again, then you may not even have to deliver a reprimand. But again, just something to think about as far as these environmental arrangements to make the environment meet the needs of our learners. Other things you can do. These are, again, these antecedent strategies. There's a lot of them because we want to put a lot of our focus on making this environment, setting our learners up for success. So let's prepare our learner. Let's write out the expectations or tell them what we're expecting of them in different situations. Maybe we can list the rules or write out some reminders or have picture reminders, right? It doesn't have to be like words if your learner's not there. It could be a visual schedule or a to-do list. Here's the things I want you to accomplish today, or here's the expectations as we're going through our day, or our chores or whatever. You can review these things before the situation occurs. I used to do this all the time with my learner, my child. All right, we're gonna go into the grocery store. Here's my list of items. These are the only things we're getting. We can look in the toy aisle, but we're not gonna buy anything. We're only gonna get what's on the list. I need you to, help push the cart and find the items, and then we're gonna look at the toys, but then we're gonna check out and we're gonna leave, right? Like I'm outlining everything that's going to happen, what I need from the learner, what we're going to do. You may do countdown timers, right? Sometimes having a visual timer or an auditory timer is very helpful because it's not just, oh, well, so-and-so says it's time to go. It's like, oh, well, the timer is going off. So it actually is time to go, because who can argue with a timer, right? It's a timer. For some learners, timers just work so much better. For other learners, they don't. So, pick and choose and see what works for your learner. Another thing to consider would be token boards. Token boards are often used in the context of maybe academic work or something like that, where it's less preferred activities, but chore charts, sticker charts, where people are accomplishing whatever their home expectations are. Maybe it's for their getting ready for bed routine. They get stickers for doing each of the things by themselves or with very little help, right? Those are all still the same type of thing. And the idea is that, again, it shows sort of a visual for what's expected and what's been done and how much more is left. And with a token board, the idea is that when they get enough, or when they fill the board or whatever the criteria is, they get to trade it in for something that is fun and exciting and enjoyable, and therefore reinforcing and getting their needs met in a positive way. All right, so step number 2, we've done all of this antecedent, try and make the environment as perfect as we can, meet all the needs of the learner, or meet the needs of the learner for that particular overly applied behavior. So the second step is teach self-advocacy. Teach them how to get their needs met in this situation in a more effective and efficient way. So if the environment is not meeting the learner's needs, then we want to teach the learner to self-advocate to get their needs met. So, I can't leave candy out all the time. You can't just eat candy all the time. So I can't make this a completely perfect environment. But maybe candy can be, if I'm stealing Skittles, right? We're going back to that one. Maybe candy can be more frequently available sometimes, right? Maybe we can have a few more candy opportunities. to start with. So I'm not sneaking candy. And at least that way, you know how much candy I'm eating, right? We might need to start at the like, well, they're sneaking it, so I have no idea how much they're consuming. Let's at least see, let's put it back where we're all on the same page. So, but I can't do that forever. So let's teach self-advocacy. What can be taught to get the candy? I could maybe ask for the candy. I could ask for some candy. Maybe I can take my own money and go to the store and buy my own candy. As an adult, I mean, I can go to the store and buy 24 chocolate bars if that's what I want to do with my money. Will I regret it when I eat them all later? Yes, probably. But I can go out and get my needs met instead of stealing the candy or whatever. So often when we're talking about self-advocacy skills, we are talking about communication skills, telling someone what you need. I'm really hungry. May I please have a snack? Miss So-and-so, can I please have some help with this assignment? Or Mom, Dad, can you play with me for a little bit? That is the learner self-advocating for getting their needs met. This also is an opportunity for us to teach and allow for more independence. This way, our learner can get their needs met in different ways. Maybe they can be more independent. So maybe they don't need to communicate to somebody necessarily. Maybe they can start to learn the skills to get that need met on their own. So for example, I'll use the hungry one, right? My child is old enough now that we have started learning how to cook certain things, mostly microwave, one stovetop thing, but those skills now mean that if my child is hungry, then they can go and they can not just get whatever prepackaged snacks might be around, but they can make something in the microwave. They can make their own oatmeal. They can heat up a Hot Pocket. They can make some ramen noodles. And that then allows them to get their needs met in a more efficient and effective way than maybe trying to find me and getting me to cook for them in between like planned meals or something, right? So a learner we might be teaching more independent skills there. When we're teaching these self-advocacy skills, we do have to practice it in isolation before the need arises. Okay, so let's think about this. If you are already super, super hungry, remember that might be one of those antecedents that make someone kind of cranky, then they might not be in the best headspace to learn how to cook something. Plus, cooking something takes time. So instead, we might need to start with meeting their needs, right? So have a little snack, have a cup of juice, and then now we're gonna work on, I'm gonna teach you how to do this thing in the microwave that's real quick so that you can have something else, right? So we wanna practice these skills outside of the learner's need to use them. We want to start from this place of their needs are met. This isn't a critical emergency right now for them. And now we can teach them what to do if their needs weren't met. So same thing, like thinking about breaks. If your learner is engaging in behavior to get out of something, then you might say, let's say we took some data and our learner, after about 5 minutes of math, they start engaging in whatever their overly adapted behavior is. It doesn't even matter really what the behaviors are. So after 5 minutes of math, they start using this overly applied behavior. So let's go back to setting up the environment, and we are going to make sure that we give them breaks every 3 minutes, because we know that they can usually go about 5 minutes before they sort of hit their wall. So we're going to give them breaks every 3 minutes. Now, my learner's getting their breaks frequently. When I want to teach it, let's teach it while they're within that 3 minutes, right? So before they get to the point where they need a break and before our scheduled break, we can say, hey, let's practice. Pretend like the math is getting really hard for you, and you can say, can I have a break? Right? And let's practice. And the kid says, oh, can I have a break? Or break, please. Or they touch the break card, right? Whatever their communication skill is. And we say, great, yeah, you can have a break. And then we send them off into their break, right? And then they're practicing it when they don't need it, but we're also still arranging the environment so that their needs are met. And then we can slowly start stretching out. Maybe instead of 3 minutes, now we change it to 4 minutes. And then if our learner like gets to 3.5 minutes and then they're like, I need a break, you're like, awesome, let's take that break. So that's really what we're talking about with self-advocacy skills. We want to start from a position of their needs are met, and then we're going to teach, what do you do if your needs weren't met? And we want to practice that so that they are still getting their needs met. So we're not teaching maybe just tough it out and do all of your math. We're teaching, how do you tell us that you need a break? Because we still want to teach the self-advocacy skill of getting your needs met. So some potential self-advocacy skills might be, tell somebody what it is that you need. Maybe ask for what you want. There might be specific situation-specific strategies, like maybe we teach the learner how to take their own medicine. Again, thinking of our learners who are closer to that independence, how to take their own medicine for a headache. Or my kid, we just started, they're taking their own vitamins. So managing that piece of it. And then we want to make sure that those self-advocacy skills are honored, and we are reinforcing those in the environment. So when my learner says, I need a break, I say, great, you go take a break. Because remember, when our learner didn't have that skill or wasn't using that skill, they were engaging in this overly adapted behavior, overly applied behavior that we determined was dangerous to them or others, or was disruptive or affecting their, to their learning or affecting their quality of life. So we're only intervening on things that were significantly hindering them. So we don't want them to fall back on those skills. We want them to use the new skills, which means we have to honor those. Now, again, you're probably thinking, I can't honor them every time. And it's like, that's okay. We'll work towards fading it out. But remember, they were already using this overly applied behavior to get their needs met. Let's honor and reinforce this more appropriate, effective, efficient way so that that's their default behavior when they encounter those situations in the future. All right. When we're teaching these alternatives, we want to practice in safe, easy situations. We want to provide all the support and the prompts to help the learner be successful. We want to create lots of these practice opportunities, and we want to reinforce the use of those strategies. Again, these are replacing the overly applied behaviors, because the overly applied behavior was dangerous or harmful in some way. So we want to use these. We want them to be successful. We want to teach them not when they're stressed out and need to use the skill, but in a calm, safe environment where their needs are already met, so that they can be successful. They can take the time to learn and practice and feel confident in that skill so that they can use it if they need it. Now, let's talk about reinforcement, because I have mentioned we want to reinforce these behaviors. Reinforcement is a consequence, but it is anything that follows a behavior and increases or maintains the frequency or future occurrence of that behavior. Not everybody likes the same things, so an important part of reinforcers is finding out what they like. Ways to identify what they like might be ask them. You might go through a preference list, a checklist, or a reinforcer menu. You might interview the caregiver. If you are the caregiver, you might already have a really good idea as to what their highly preferred items are or activities or whatever it is. You can let them pick stuff from the environment. You can offer a couple of choices. But the idea is that you want to use reinforcement. You want to reinforce all the practice. Now, another thing that can come to mind that can use as a reinforcer is specifically what is the function that of the overly applied behavior that you're teaching anyway. So if they're engaging in an overly applied behavior for attention, then you can give attention as a reinforcer for using the appropriate behavior. So you don't have to bring in more stuff. However, it could be helpful to bring in maybe bigger, more powerful, more potent reinforcers when you're initially teaching something new, just to really ramp up that opportunity to grasp the concept. Another thing to think about while we're teaching these replacement behaviors is collaboration and generalization. You want to collaborate with as many people in your learner's life as you can so that they are all practicing these skills. They're trying to meet the learner's needs. They're practicing the replacement skills. They're reinforcing those replacement skills if the learner uses them. And the skills that we're teaching in particular are going to be ones that the learner can generalize to their settings. So for example, at school, the teacher might really want the learner to raise their hand for attention because there's a whole classroom. However, at home, mom and dad may not want the learner to sit there and raise their hand. They may want them to just say, "Hey, mom, hey, dad," or come up and tap them on the shoulder, right? So we might teach several different ways to get attention, and we might practice those different ways, and we might reinforce all of those different ways or reinforce certain ones with certain people. But we want to make sure that we are supporting the learner, that the learner is getting their needs met in a way that different environments and different people are going to reinforce and therefore help the learner self-advocate because they are doing something that works in that environment. But you oftentimes need to have everybody at the table, maybe not all at the same time, but as much as you can, to make sure that you're choosing goals and skills that are going to work across those different environments. All right, so we've talked about meeting the learner's needs, teaching the self-advocacy skills. But what happens if, we're trying, but we just can't make the perfect environment, which is realistic, right? We try and do our best, but you can't always have things perfect. Maybe they're still pretty new to learning that replacement behavior, so those self-advocacy skills just aren't quite as strong yet, and they don't use that self-advocacy skills that we've been teaching. So what happens if they do engage in that overly applied behavior after we've done all of this stuff? Again, if we're doing all of this systematically and we're able to create a really good environment and we're able to teach the replacement behaviors, they shouldn't need it anymore. They shouldn't need that overly applied anymore. But things don't always go perfectly. It's the real world. Makes sense. There's basically two options. One you may have heard of before is called extinction. It's going to look different depending upon the function. And extinction basically would be sort of like waiting them out through the behavior until you can move on to something else. I'm not going to go into a lot more of it because there's a better way. Extinction, it can be a good choice for certain situations that maybe aren't responding in other ways, but it requires support. It requires planning. It's going to look different for every function. It requires everybody to be on the same page, and it's very hard. It's just very hard. It's very stressful. I'll use an example that probably a lot of parents are familiar with. When excuse me. All right. I'll use an example that a lot of parents may be familiar with. When a baby is being taught maybe to sleep in their own crib or their own bed, sometimes people use a strategy called cry it out. And the idea is that they are going to, the baby is crying for attention, and you are going to not give the baby attention so that the baby learns to calm itself down so that it begins to sleep in its bed, sleep through the night. As a parent, I attempted maybe one night of that, and it was so stressful and so hard for me to hear my baby cry that I said, nope, this isn't gonna work. Cry it out is an extinction procedure. And the hope with an extinction procedure is that if you don't reinforce the overly applied behavior, the learner will figure out what behavior they should do instead on their own. But that doesn't always happen. They're gonna do something until they get their needs met, or potentially they're gonna learn that you won't meet their needs. And that's not the lesson we want to teach. So extinction used to be the big recommendation. You may still hear it. It still can work in certain situations, but realistically, in the real world, we're not going to run extinction like it would in a clinical setting. So alternatively, if we know why our learner is engaging in this overly applied behavior, right? We've already done our ABC analysis. We know what the function is. We can just meet their need to de-escalate the situation for the moment. When our learner is already upset, when they're already escalated, they're not really in a position to learn very well. So let's just give them what it is that they need in that moment, and then let's go back and see what we can adjust with our environment and our replacement behaviors, our self-advocacy skills, so that we can be prepared and we can avoid that situation in the future. Now, sometimes people will say, yes, but if I give in to them when they're crying, or, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily intervene just for crying, but, they're throwing this big tantrum, then that just teaches them that that tantrum works. And it's like, well, yes, but they already know that that tantrum works because they already are doing that behavior, right? So what we need to do instead is just de-escalate that situation and then go back and work more systematically on how do we help them not get to the point where that's the only thing they can fall back on. So that's our step number 3. We respond and we reset. We want to address the situation to maintain the safety and to return back to the routine. So we're not saying, let somebody beat something up, right? We're trying to de-escalate the situation. We're trying to keep everybody safe, and we're trying to just get back to what we were doing so that we can go back through those steps, try and arrange the environment, practice the replacement skills, the self-advocacy skills even more, so that our learner doesn't have to fall back on the overly applied behavior. So you might need to, in this respond and reset, you might need to provide prompts to help them use their skills, right? So if your learner is, maybe they're just engaging in those precursor behaviors, they are still responsive to your prompts and your assistance, then you might just need to say like, oh, I can see you're looking frustrated. Do you need a break? Or let's take a break. Or touch the break card. Here we go. So you might be able to deliver some prompts or some guidance so that they can practice their self-advocacy skill. You might be able to just meet their need without them doing anything, right? If they're past the point where they can follow the instructions or anything like that, then you might need to just say, oh, I can see that you need a break from math, and you just pick up the math work, right? Whatever that might be. You might be able to redirect them to a different activity that has more supports for them. Oh, I can see that this isn't working for us right now. Let's go to this other thing, which is maybe more preferred. It's an easier task. It's something that they can do without the same level of challenges that are evoking that overly applied behavior, or any of the other strategies that have worked in the past to quickly de-escalate the situation. Because when our learners are escalated, they're in crisis mode, right? They don't have a strategy to meet their needs, and whatever they tried isn't working, and they have an unmet need. So let's just meet the need, and then let's go back and see how we can set them up to be more successful the next time that this situation occurs. So revisit your plan, right? Figure out what that looks like. Are you sure you know what the learner needs, right? Maybe we weren't correct on what they needed, or maybe they needed that and this other piece, right? Like I've worked with learners, well, I think we were doing it with the math homework example. They need help with the task. The task is hard. They want out of the task, and they want attention. They want somebody there with them. That's two things. That's escape and attention. Maybe when we first looked at the patterns, we thought, oh, well, it's all attention. So here's how I'm going to teach them to ask for attention and to self-advocate for the attention. But I neglected to teach them to say, I need a break, or this is too hard, or I don't understand. So now I realize, oh, it's actually both. Great. Let's teach more self-advocacy skills that cover all of the aspects that they're trying to meet, right? Maybe go back and reevaluate your antecedent strategies. Are there other ways that you can meet their needs? Are there other things that you can do? Even if they're a little challenging at first, maybe can we do them for a short period of time to really just help boost the learner, to give them that good environment for teaching? Reevaluate those self-advocacy skills. Are there enough ways for the learner to get their needs met? Just because they tried one thing, maybe we need to teach several other things and teach them to try several different things so that they can be successful, right? I raise my hand, but the teacher doesn't call on me. Now what? Like what are our backup strategies? Teach the learner different strategies that are still going to help them with their self-advocacy. And then ultimately, your plan, if they're still engaging in this overly applied behavior, your plan isn't sufficient. And it's okay to change the plan if it's not working. What you don't want to do is put the bulk of your interventions after the occurrence of the behavior. At best, what you are teaching is that once they have the behavior, then they can get the supports that they need. But at worst, you're maybe creating a cycle where they engage in the overly applied behavior first, prior to the appropriate skills. So instead, make sure that you're focusing your time and energy on setting up an environment that meets their needs and teaching those self-advocacy skills so that they can get their needs met in a situation where the environment is not giving them what they need at that moment. And as you increase and reinforce and practice, and the learner starts to use these self-advocacy skills, then you can start to shrink down how much extra you are putting into that natural environment. I mean, there are some things that, you might want to keep in because they're just really good practices. But let's say you were delivering attention on a really frequent basis, and you're not able to maintain that forever. You have other individuals who need your attention. You have other things that need your attention. You can start to gradually decrease the frequency that you are making contact with that learner, that you are delivering that attention. And as long as they're starting to use those self-advocacy skills, then you can continue to decrease this side as they continue to use their self-advocacy skills more often. And that way you're not stuck in like trying to have this perfect environment for the learner forever, because that's not realistic and that's not doing our learner any favors. We want to use that nice environment that meets their needs to give them a head start so that they can learn the self-advocacy skills so that they don't have to fall back on these overly applied skills that they have used in the past. And that is the end. So thank you so much for your attention.